Well, let's start by defining transit-oriented development, or TOD. In the publication, Transit Villages in the 21st Century, the primary authors identified three characteristics of successful TODs. They call them the 3Ds of transit-oriented development: density, diversity, and design. Density means having enough residents and workers within a reasonable walking distance of a transit station to generate high ridership. Sounds like the Miracle Mile, potentially. Diversity, a mixture of land uses, housing types, and ways of circulating within the TOD area. Sounds a little bit like we have some potential here in the Miracle Mile. And design, physical features and site layouts that are conducive to walking, biking, and transit riding, which is exactly the reason the council member talked about the importance of infrastructure, not just being roads, but infrastructure being places for people to walk. In short, TOD is an alternative to sprawl. Why is sprawl the problem? About 70% of our area's smog problem is caused by vehicles and other sources that use internal combustion engines. With 15 million residents and 11 million motor vehicles, motorists in the basins drive more than 318 million miles every day. Wow. Future growth means more vehicles on our roadways, adding pollution to the air we breathe, unless we can come up with new ways to live and to travel.
This conference is about connections. It's about a connection between good design, development, and walking and health. It's about connection between our transportation system and cleanliness of our air and the health of our lungs. If we're going to ask people to walk and to ride transit and to change their ways, we need to make those experiences enjoyable. The city's financial troubles are seemingly insurmountable and overwhelming, but I've worked nonetheless to try and get us to improve our sidewalks, parkways, and street trees. Although, honestly, right now, with the city pretty broke, we're not spending a lot of money on that. But I'm trying to find ways to do it. In some of our significant business districts, I've pushed to start up business improvement districts, so where the city can't pay for some of these things directly, particularly in places like Westwood Village, which has gotten a little let down. We're going to fix up the sidewalks and trim the trees and do all the things we've done as a public-private partnership, mostly relying on the private. And I think if we make that experience more desirable, instead of people driving far away to shop, there is a huge amount of density near there. We're hoping everyone will walk to Westwood Village and walk in Westwood Village. And we can do that throughout the city. We can't expect people to walk if the sidewalks are impassable. We can't expect for people to wait for the bus if there's no shade and there's incredibly long waits. We can't expect business to invest in our city if we're not investing in our own infrastructure. So we're not doing that as much as I'd like. In the years to come on the council, I hope to try and turn that around. And I look forward to continuing to work with all of you on these issues so we can make our city a healthier, more attractive, and prosperous place in which to work and live, and a more transit-oriented place as well.
Anyone here against the subway down Wilshire? Okay, no one raised their hand, which is good, because in the past there were people against the subway. The subway's coming. We can do a lot of great things. I want to thank Rick Caruso. After I thank Hank Hilty at Farmers Market first, they made that corner. Third at Fairfax. I've already talked to Rick. I'm going to work to extend the trolley down to Wilshire. And all this goes to health. There was a freeway plan, never happened. There was a subway plan, derailed, challenged. Now we're back on track. It's going to happen. I pledge my support.
We heavily promote this sort of social interaction side of the shopping, dining, movie-going experience. That's our whole concept in a nutshell. And then I wanted to just mention infrastructure because it's sort of funny. We have this argument all the time. You know, we have a kind of let it all hang out attitude, and it scares traffic engineers and planners to death because, you know, we're fine if our delivery trucks unload on the street, you know, and we're fine if people are pushing carts of merchandise through the property. We think that's all kind of part of the show, and obviously there's a limit to that. At some point it bogs things down. But that to us is more of an authentic experience of an urban place than having everything underground or hidden away. You know, the thing about retail is that retail is this business of dividing the population up into tiny little slivers. And every little sliver is representative of people who have some things in common. And if you can design a product or design a store or an image or a brand that appeals to those people, then you're going to be successful. And to some extent, that means that you're going to exclude everybody else, right? Well, the thing about transit-oriented development is that it has to be inclusive. Everybody's got to be able to go there and feel that that's a place they belong. And that's a challenge for people in my business, because we're more used to carving out a section of the populace and saying, we're going to go after those people, and we're going to try to make them come to our shopping center and not those other people.
Areas in the transportation management plan to the actual operations that we kind of lost some momentum is in the balance of multimodal transportation. We really didn't invest in infrastructure of transportation because it was there. We invested in behavioral incentives. So we were investing in ticket bundles for Kings games, or trying to create, when we first opened LA Live, we were part of a group who invested in extending the Red Line's hours for a pilot program in December. Really trying to increase frequency and number of trips versus actual infrastructure. We believe that we need to do a better job of balancing it this time around. We also think there's huge opportunities around bicycling that we haven't really seized yet, as well as in information management. How to get real-time information about your transit options to the consumers that are coming to you. Balances of services versus retail. We built our vision around entertainment, which doesn't have a retail component for us. But because of the convention center business, we've been hearing loud and clear that there's a need for retail to maintain and keep the tourists coming through for conventions. So our other businesses in London and others might not have a convention component, but here in LA we do recognize the need for more retail.
But transit-oriented development is in of itself not the goal. It's a means to the goal. The goal is great places. The goal is great living well. So building just to support transit is not the way we ought to be doing it. Transit ought to be supporting us, and recognizing the synergy between the two is where we are hopefully working toward. We live our lives on our feet or on our bikes or in our wheelchairs or whatever, when we're out of our cars, on our feet, and that generally takes place on the sidewalk. And so creating these great sidewalks where people really want to walk because they're just so darn good is part of the puzzle.
We're there when it comes to transit-oriented development. I know a couple of you out in the audience sat on the land use committee of the local neighborhood council while projects were brought, working with the neighbors, and there was, initially typically a lot of contention between the neighbors, the residential neighbors, and the projects on Wilshire. They were successfully resolved. We have the transit-oriented development here. It's kind of in place. We've got 10,000 people that work within 2 blocks of here. It's a lot. Those buildings are full, and they've got approximately 10,000 employees. We need that public transportation, because it's sort of like, okay, we'll build it because people believe that the subway would come. To Fairfax, we're going to see it. It's going to happen. But when you drive and you walk around this neighborhood, we are the transit-oriented area. We've got the cultural institutions are already in place and have taken steps to open their plaza. The Lock was a perfect example. For a long time, there was a building along the Wilshire frontage. It was kind of like just a solid wall. That's changed dramatically.
Real challenges that exist here for transit-oriented development in the Miracle Mile, as Neil referenced, there's very low-density neighborhoods just off Wilshire Boulevard. A block to the south here, you have single-family homes. There's an obsolete general plan and community plan. The transportation element dates, I think, from 1999, long before Measure R. I mean, there's just nothing in it that talks about real transit-oriented development, I think, in a very real way that's concrete to our neighborhoods. The Wilshire Community Plan in 2001 makes no reference to the subway, so has a lot of policies in it that might not be the right policies for today. But I think a lot of community stakeholders say it's the plan, you really need to be following it, when it might not reflect the reality of what's going on today. So how do we get there? I think you really need to update the general plan and the community plans, make the plans real. I think in terms of how to get community support is one thing. I think be honest with the neighborhoods. As I mentioned, the plans tend to be very wishy-washy. They said there's lots of vague language that people who live there can say, no, we're not going to have growth, but the developers can use to say, here's where the growth is going to happen. If the Miracle Mile is going to be targeted for growth, and I personally think it should be, if the subway is going to be coming through, be honest with us about that. You know, I think admit the traffic congestion is probably going to increase. You know, Neil said, you know, there are examples of places where you can have a lot of transit-oriented development that don't result in additional trips. I'm not convinced that this part of Los Angeles that's going to happen. And don't cheat on the analysis that you do. You know, developers all the time, I think, do it is, you know, you change your projected, you know, if you think a little bit more people are going to be going to work in Century City as opposed to downtown, the intersections that you impact can be very different. And so I think sometimes the community members who are reading all these traffic studies, and there's some very smart people who read them all very in detail, they know that everyone's using different estimates. And it really leads to a lack of, I think, credibility and belief in the integrity of the system and results in poor decisions.